If you are considering an expensive macro or portrait lens from Canon, Nikon, or Sony, do not place the order yet. Laowa, SIRUI, and Viltrox now offer 3 alternatives that preserve the features photographers usually pay premium prices for, from 2x macro magnification to full-frame f1.4 and f1.8 apertures. They are not identical to first-party glass, but the money they save may be far more valuable than the features they sacrifice. You are watching Alt Buzz Lenses, so if honest buying guides are your thing, subscribe now and let's get into it. At number 3, we have the Laowa 90mm Ultra Macro, a lens built by a company that rarely bothers making ordinary versions of ordinary lenses. Strip away the marketing, and here is what remains. No autofocus, no image stabilization, and a price under $500. In exchange, it reaches 2x life size on the sensor, without an extension tube, without a teleconverter, without any workaround at all. That number matters more than it sounds. Most macro lenses top out at 1:1 magnification. This one doubles that, while still focusing all the way out to infinity, which means it never becomes a single-purpose tool gathering dust between shoots. The apochromatic design controls the color fringing that ruins reflective surfaces, the kind of detail that separates a lens built for serious close-up work from one that merely claims macro in its name. But the trade is real. There is no camera-controlled aperture ring turning this into a point-and-shoot experience. There is no stabilization catching a shaky hand at extreme magnification. Insects that move, portraits that need speed, anything handheld and spontaneous. This lens was never built for that. It was built for photographers with a tripod, a focusing rail, and the patience to work the shot rather than chase it. Think about what 2x magnification actually reveals. The texture inside a sapphire, the engraving on a watch movement smaller than a fingernail, the weave of a fabric sample under studio light. A conventional macro lens gets close. This one gets underneath the surface entirely, and that difference is the whole reason a specialist would choose it over a lens that merely advertises the word macro. It rewards a slower kind of photography, the kind where the subject is not going anywhere, and the photographer has time to chase perfection, one careful adjustment at a time. There is a discipline to shooting this way that modern autofocus has quietly let photographers forget. Manual focusing at extreme magnification means the depth of field shrinks to a sliver, sometimes just a few millimeters wide, and the smallest breath or hand tremor can shift the plane of focus entirely. That is not a weakness of the lens. It is simply the nature of working this close to a subject, and it explains why so many photographers using this glass eventually add a focusing rail to their kit, turning centimeters of movement into fractions of a millimeter they can actually control. Jewelry photographers know this trade already. Watch collectors documenting movements down to the smallest screw know it too. Film scanning enthusiasts, coin collectors, anyone building a catalog of small, still, unmoving detail, this is where the Laowa quietly becomes indispensable rather than merely interesting. If your work depends on eye autofocus tracking a moving subject, the first-party alternative earns its higher price. But if you have ever wished your 1:1 macro reached just a little further, Laowa quietly built the answer, and it costs less than half of what the big three charge for their own take on the same idea. Laowa saves money by removing automation almost entirely. The next brand takes a harder path, one that tries to keep autofocus alive, at a price nobody expected. At number 2, we have the SIRUI Aurora 85mm, a lens from a company still better known for tripods and cinema support gear than for glass that belongs in a portrait bag. That reputation is exactly why this lens keeps slipping under the radar. 85mm at f1.4 is one of the most competitive categories in modern photography, and SIRUI just walked into it with a price under $450, while Sony's own version of the same idea sits close to $2,000. What makes the Aurora worth a second look is not just the number on the price tag. It carries real autofocus, a 15-blade aperture built for smooth, almost painterly background rendering, and a body light enough to survive a full day of portrait sessions without wearing down the shooter's arm. For studio work, for family sessions, for the kind of controlled environment where the photographer decides where the subject stands and how the light falls, this lens does almost everything the flagship does. There is also a quieter kind of confidence built into this lens, the kind that shows up in the small decisions rather than the headline spec. A declickable aperture ring that video shooters will appreciate the moment they need silent, smooth exposure changes mid-take. Custom controls that feel considered rather than borrowed. None of this is the reason someone buys an 85mm prime, but it is the reason a photographer keeps reaching for one lens over another once the excitement of a new purchase wears off. It is worth remembering where SIRUI came from to understand where it might be going. A company that spent years perfecting tripods and cinema support gear has a different kind of engineering discipline than a company chasing its first still photography lens. That background shows up in the build quality and the mechanical feel of the lens even before autofocus enters the conversation, and it is part of why this release feels less like an experiment and more like a genuine first step into a new category. The honest compromise sits in autofocus maturity. This is a newer system, still proving itself against subjects that move fast and light, that keeps changing. Continuous tracking, low light acquisition, the kind of split-second confidence a wedding photographer needs when the moment will not repeat itself. That is where the established first-party system still holds the edge. Firmware support is still young too, and buyers switching mounts should know that behavior can vary meaningfully from one camera body to another, a detail worth researching before committing, rather than discovering after the fact. For a portrait photographer working at their own pace, though, that gap rarely shows up at all. This is where AltBuzz Lenses earns its name, digging past the spec sheet to find the lens that actually deserves your money. If that sounds like your kind of channel, the subscribe button is right there, and it costs nothing but a click. SIRUI proves that fast autofocus glass does not have to come with a flagship price tag. But keeping every headline feature intact, that is a much harder promise to make. At number 1, we have the Viltrox 135mm LAB, a lens that no longer fits comfortably in the budget category it came from. It is heavier and more ambitious than most first-party primes, and at roughly $900, the price is nearly the only part of this lens that still looks affordable. Compare it directly to Nikon's own Plena, built around the same focal length and the same f1.8 aperture, and the gap becomes the whole story. Nikon's version costs close to $2,500. Viltrox keeps the focal length, the aperture, the autofocus, the internal focusing, even close-up magnification that adds real versatility, all while asking less than half the price. 135mm is not a casual focal length. It compresses backgrounds into soft, layered color, and it puts real distance between photographer and subject, which is exactly why it has earned a reputation among portrait and stage photographers who need to work from further back, without losing intimacy in the frame. Matching that focal length to an f1.8 aperture and calling it a flagship challenger is not an exaggeration. It is a direct, deliberate answer to the exact lens Nikon built its own reputation around. There is something almost bold about a third-party manufacturer choosing to compete this directly. Most affordable alternatives find a gap in the lineup, a focal length or aperture combination the first-party brand has not addressed yet. Viltrox did the opposite here. It looked at Nikon's most celebrated modern portrait lens and built a direct answer to it, matching the exact specification rather than settling for something adjacent. And that decision alone says something about how seriously this brand now takes its own ambitions. So where is the catch? It is weight, plain and simple. This lens comes in at over 1,200 grams, compared to under 1,000 for the Plena, and that difference is felt by hour 3 of a wedding reception, or during a long gimbal setup where every gram fights back. A photographer moving through a full day of shooting will feel that extra weight in their shoulder long before they feel it in their images, and that is not a small thing to dismiss. There are quieter questions too, the kind that matter over years rather than hours. Firmware support from a newer manufacturer, service infrastructure that has not been tested by decades of professional use, resale value that has not yet been proven in a second-hand market still dominated by the big three. Replacement parts, local dealer support, how quickly a repair actually gets handled when something goes wrong on a paid shoot. These are the unglamorous details that separate an excited first impression from a lens a professional can depend on for the next 5 years. None of these questions have a universal answer. They depend on where a photographer lives, how often the lens travels, and how much risk feels acceptable when $1,000 of savings is already sitting in the bank. These are not flaws exactly. They are the unknowns a photographer accepts when they choose ambition over pedigree. But for a portrait or wedding photographer who has stared at Nikon's Plana and quietly closed the browser tab at the price, Viltrox just reopened that conversation entirely. Laowa proves that specialist magnification does not require a first-party badge. SIRUI proves that fast autofocus portrait glass does not need a $2,000 price. Viltrox goes further still, keeping nearly everything that makes a flagship lens desirable and asking only whether weight and a newer name are worth the $1,000 saved. 3 lenses, 3 different ways of saving money, and 3 different questions only you can answer. Which trade would you make? Manual focus, a newer autofocus system, or the extra weight in your bag? Have you shot with a Laowa, a SIRUI, or a Viltrox? And did it change how you see the badge on the barrel? Tell me below, I read every one. And if you want more guides like this, ones that separate real optical value from the price of a name, subscribe to Alt Buzz Lenses. Every great shot starts long before the shutter clicks. It starts with choosing the right glass. Until next time, keep your eye to the glass and let the pictures do the talking.